Hello everyone. Well, now you've seen Russia, or about as much of Russia as I've seen, and probably as much as I'm likely to see for the near future. I did obviously go to a few other places that I haven't filmed, but they're mostly not very interesting. I went to the shoreline of the Gulf of Finland a couple of times, and that's nice. It's basically just like being at the beach, except in this area there really aren't good beaches. They're kind of rocky, so it's not like, a big sandy beach with nice white sand and rolling waves that you can sunbathe on. Some people do sunbathe there, but it's mostly just kind of like a rocky place where you can climb down and be close to the water. And I went to a few other places like that. I've been to a few parks. There are lots of parks here in St. Petersburg and around the city, which are not really that remarkable. They're just like any other park, just a big field of grass and things like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I honestly probably won't be making too many videos anymore in the near future, just because I don't really have much left that I wanted to capture on film, and I don't have necessarily a whole lot to say on video, so this will probably be one of these last sort of vlog, sort of opinion piece videos that I'll be doing for a while. I guess what's my conclusion is I'm kind of torn now. I really like Russia, as you've probably gotten the impression by now. I actually very much enjoy the city of St. Petersburg, and I really liked when I went outside the city and went to that country place and saw how those farmers live on the land. And so now I'm a little bit divided, I guess, because I guess my original plan was that I wasn't going to stay in Russia for very long. I didn't really have a concrete plan in mind, but I had sort of envisioned that probably I would stay here in Russia for a year or so, and then I was going to go to Europe. I really was planning on going to somewhere in Europe and enrolling in university there and finishing my degree, which I never did in North America because it's too expensive there. Here in Russia, as well as, well, in Europe, in many European countries, university is free, especially for European Union citizens. Here in Russia, it's not free, but it's, actually I think they have free schools. I think they have free universities, and then there are some which you have to pay for, but even the paid ones are relatively inexpensive. I think they're like $1,000 US, the equivalent of $1,000 US per year, or is it per session or something like that? I mean, that's relatively affordable compared to university in Canada and the US these days. But now I'm here in Russia and I'm really liking it, and I'm sort of contrasting it with the rest of Europe. And even though Russia is kind of European, especially obviously St. Petersburg is a rather European city because it's only 100 kilometers or so from the border with Finland. Obviously Russia has a culture all its own. It's not specifically a European country. It's sort of a divide between, at least if you consider it a European country, it's sort of torn between whether it wants to be a Western or an Eastern European country. And Eastern Europe, well, I mean, these are obviously words that, with definitions that are up for debate, different people might define these things differently, and so, what you consider to be Eastern or Western Europe is kind of an individual thing, or might vary. But most of the European Union, of which of course Finland belongs to, actually every major Central and Western European country belongs to that union except Norway and Switzerland. I think that's it. Then there are some Eastern European countries that haven't joined, but as far as the most important mainland European countries go, it's pretty much just Norway and Switzerland. That's it. And the European Union is a very modern thing, and I'm not sure I like modernity. And what is modernity? I mean, obviously that's a word that that's another word that could be debated the meaning of which could be debated. But I guess modernity means different things. People use the word modern to mean just present day. They use that as kind of a synonym for contemporary or current, which is, I guess, one definition that's often, one meaning, one usage that's often seen. But the modern era also means a specific period of history, which some people argue may be over now. So, they say we may be in a postmodern era now. I mean, what is modernism? I guess it's a few different things. It's a moving away of the old forms of government and towards a more democratic sort of government. Throughout history, monarchy has been sort of the way to go. You have kings and queens, and then when they die, their descendants take over the crown and the throne and rule over the people, and it's been that way for much of Europe, for much of recent history, and by recent I mean within the last 1,000 years or so. And so modernism is sort of a move away from that towards a more individualist sort of society, more democracy, more of people making their own decisions and having more personal freedoms, as opposed to living in this sort of relatively enclosed, boxed-in society. And I guess in many ways that's a good thing, but it's like almost every other social change. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways, because in a society that's more individualistic, that values personal freedoms more, such as the West, present-day North America, people are also more isolated because there's more of an emphasis on you being your own person and less emphasis on people being part of a society. And so people are lonelier and they're more isolated and more atomized in that kind of society, which is kind of sad. And I mean, that's kind of borne out by our modern media. Loneliness is a very pervading theme among North American people today, as well as I think a lot of European people, most people in the European Union, because their societies are sort of that way. They've sort of separated people that way, and you're no longer part of a society. I sometimes comment on the irony that socialism does not create a social society. It's socialist in the sense that public money is given to society and used to help people, but it doesn't actually create social people. It's quite the opposite. It sort of separates them and creates a society where each person is an island, so to speak. And modernity is other things. Modernity is characterized also by the rise of technology, starting, of course, with, or at least in a big way, starting with the Industrial Revolution and continuing to the present day with electronics, the internet, smartphones, and so on. And that's pretty much everywhere. You see that pretty much everywhere, but one thing that I really don't like, and one thing that I guess you might say characterizes modernity, is sort of the replacing of people with machines. And again, that started a long time ago. That started back in the days of the Luddites, already back in, when was that? That was well over 100 years ago. Was that like 200 or 300 years ago? I apologize. I'm very ignorant about history. Unfortunately, regrettably so. I'm actually very regrettably ignorant of what's really happened in history, and I never really studied it. I should know more, but I'm afraid I don't. But I understand that the term Luddite sort of originates from people, I guess it was probably about 200 or 300 years ago, who would destroy mechanical machinery. There's a redundant phrase for you. Machines that were replacing people's jobs because they believed, and probably partly truthfully or correctly, that those machines took jobs away from people. And you still kind of see that today. I mean, now computers are doing jobs that used to have to be done by people. There are many different sort of electrical and mechanical systems that automate things. And again, that's happening everywhere. But there's very much a push to do that in the West. The North American business model really seeks to eliminate human beings from their processes as much as possible because people are expensive. Payrolls today are one of the most significant expenditures of any corporation's balance sheets, more so than their machinery or their office space or things like that. So people are expensive, and they've been getting replaced with machines, and that's a pervading element of modernity. And I certainly wouldn't say that that doesn't exist in Russia. I mean, Russia is a modernizing society as well, but because it's so isolated, because it's not a part of the European Union or any other real union, I mean, it's part of the UN, but that's a little different. Russia has sort of been slower to modernize in that way, and one example that sort of stood out for me of that was when I first came to Russia, actually. I came into Russia by train. I didn't fly here. I flew to Finland, and then from Finland took a train into Russia. And one of my first impressions of Russia was noticing that at every crossing, where the street intersects with the train rails, they have an actual crossing guard, like an actual person who's paid to just stand there. And when a train comes, stand in front of step into the road and stand in front of the traffic and wave a flag and say, hey, there's a train coming. And that's something you don't see very much in Canada or the US. I don't know about the rest of Europe, but I kind of doubt that you'd see that in much of Europe either. Because that's a job that's easily automated. Today, in most... actually, in every single active train crossing that I've seen in Canada and the U.S., they just have mechanized train crossings. there's that arm that comes down, and then the red lights flash and the bell start, ding, 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 ding. The bell flashes, the bell rings, and lets you know that there's a train coming. And they have that here as well. I mean, they have the same thing at these Russian train crossings, but there's also a person. And the thing is, the person is completely redundant in that sense, because anybody, any driver or pedestrian or whatever who is anywhere nearby will hear the bell and see the lights, unless they're blind and deaf, in which case they wouldn't obviously be driving a car. So anybody who's driving a car there will obviously know that there's a train coming, but they still have a person there waving a flag for pretty much no reason. And that person would have been laid off a long time ago in the United States. They would have said, this person is redundant. They've been replaced by an automated machine. We should get rid of them. And here in Russia, the mentality seems to be more along the lines of, why would we get rid of these people? What are they going to do? These train crossings are mostly not like in the city, in the center of the city, but in kind of outlying areas and small villages. And, these are people with... probably with families and things like that. And what kind of work are they going to do? I mean, if we fire them and eliminate their jobs, then what are they going to do? They're probably not going to be able to support themselves, and they're going to commit suicide. And then where will their spouses or children or other family members be? And that seems to be sort of the mentality here in Russia, that people are still important in that way, that even if their jobs are sort of redundant, we'll still keep them around because we don't want to let them go. We don't want to give people the axe that way, so to speak. And that very rarely happens. It's pretty much the opposite mentality in North America. It's really, there they actively seek as much as possible. They actively try to make people redundant as much as possible so they can lay those people off. And I'm sure that happens in some businesses here in Russia, but it's not the pervading mentality. It's not necessarily, it's different. It's a different way of looking at people and their value and their worth. And